8:11's the time. It's AM 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. A whole 24 degrees outside. Mark Meckler has been patiently waiting by, one of the co-founders of the National Tea Party movement. Mark, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from somewhere near the burning infernos in California today.
Oh, okay. So you're nice and warm and toasty over there.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So go ahead and melt us a s'more and send it. We'll be just fine.
I think we'll just avoid the fire.
Yeah, that would probably be a good idea. Well, over here in Wyoming, and of course I'm in the capital here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and boy, we just got through a snowstorm like you wouldn't believe. So the rest of the week, just stunningly beautiful here. We got the weather out of the way. Sorry about the fires over there. All right, now again, I said you're one of the co-founders of the National Tea Party movement, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to push back against that a little bit. I think the Tea Party movement really founded itself, and I was one of the co-founders of an organization called Tea Party Patriots, and we just gave those sentiments a home. I think calling me a founder of the movement is kind of like telling a surfer he created a great wave.
Yeah, I understand it, because I was in North Carolina at the time when the whole thing got going, and I quickly got together with some people and organized a group that's still active today and has gotten to run a few of the old timers, out of office, some of the old establishment there, and got some new people in. So I was happy to be part of that. All right. Now, though, you're working on something entirely different. So this is a convention of states, which I hear about from time to time, but I always wonder, how's the progress on getting that done?
Man, the progress is incredible, way faster than we ever anticipated, never been done before in American history. It takes 34 states to call that convention, and so far we've just passed the one-third of the way mark, so 12 states have actually called for the convention, 24 to go.
Okay, now here's where I got to play, always got to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
So some people will say, well, if you have a convention of the states, last time we did that, which I believe is the only time we did that, it kind of got out of control and we wound up with pretty much a whole new constitution. Do you worry about things like that?
No, not at all. And it's really important. So if it's conservatives that are telling you things like that, they need to understand they've become tools of the radical left. Because if you want to know who says stuff like that and where it comes from, you got to listen to Hillary Clinton, George Soros, Howard Dean, ACLU, NAACP, AFL-CIO, La Raza, Planned Parenthood. All these groups say exactly what you just said. This is a fiction invented by those groups literally back in the 1970s. And the reality is 1787 was not a runaway convention. Every delegate had full authority to do exactly what they did. So they've created fake history, just like they create fake news, and they've done it to keep conservatives from using the one tool the founders gave us to restrain a runaway federal government.
Oh, by the way, just a side note for you. I'm no longer saying junk science when talking about climate change. I have now officially changed it to fake science.
I love it.
Yeah,
and this is fake history.
And there you go. Fake history, fake science, fake news. They're just going to toss it out there. Okay, so now, what exactly then, for those who haven't heard of this yet, let's get everybody up to speed. What is the purpose of the convention?
Sure. Well, so today in America, there's some things that most Americans agree upon. By most, I mean 75 to 80% of polling. Number one is Americans agree that the federal government has to get its fiscal house in order. And this is not just a Republican issue or conservative issue. Democrats agree can't spend more than you take in forever. And so the first thing is imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government. The second thing is most Americans, the number's about 75%, say the federal government is too big and does too much. So we need to limit the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government, get it out of our lives, and get control and government back where it belongs, close to the people in the states and the communities. So that's the second thing, is addressing the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. And the third thing is something that's almost universal, which is people think we need term limits for Congress. And I would add term limits for the courts, or the Supreme Court specifically, and term limits for federal bureaucrats. So these are the things that can be addressed in an actual convention. Okay,
for those who joining me, I'm talking with Mark Meckler, and you can find conventionofthestates.com is where all of this information is. His big smiling face, great teeth, by the way.
Thank you. Love that. My parents paid a lot of money for that, so I'll give them credit.
Okay, so now to make sure we get this together, we have to have how many states in order to trigger this?
Sure. So it takes 34 states, and the Constitution says two-thirds of states today. That's 34 states to call the convention. And the way it works is it's by a joint resolution. Both houses of the state legislature have to pass a resolution in the same session in order to trigger that state's actual application.
But you're dealing with, since you have to have Congress inside of this, you're dealing with a Congress who can't seem to get anything done. I mean, they can't even pass a one-sentence bill to repeal Obamacare. So how do you plan to get their help in setting this up?
Well, the beauty beauty of it is, intentionally, Article 5 bypasses Congress.
Okay.
No help from Congress necessary. And this is one of the things that most Americans don't realize. We, the people, were given the power to address the situation we're in right now. In other words, the founders knew the federal government would get out of control, and this clause of Article 5 was actually inserted in the Constitution with this time in mind. They literally asked this question in convention. They said, are we so naive to believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny?
Right.
They didn't even debate it at convention. Madison's notes reflect it was unanimous, no debate. They said, no, we're going to have to give this to the people. So it intentionally bypasses Congress, the courts, and the president.
Okay, now, and pardon the accent here, but this is what I hear on the phone. Every so often, somebody calls my program, well, lock and load, buddy, because that's the only way we're going to turn over this government. Okay, you can't even get enough people together to show up and have a decent protest in Washington, D.C. I doubt you're going to get the nation to lock and load. I don't think so. But so we don't have to pick up guns and overthrow our government. This was inserted into the Constitution. It's basically another way to rebel.
It is. I mean, I call this the most reasonable, rational, radical solution. It was given to us by the founders. They spilled the blood so that we don't have to. And I would say to anybody who says, I hear what you just said all the time, all over the country. And what I say to them is, look, yeah, maybe someday it comes to something like that, but we have an obligation to use the peaceful constitutional tools, to use the Constitution to save the Constitution the way the founders intended us to.
For complete details and rules on how to play AM 650 KGAB contests and win, visit KGAB.com. That's KGAB.com.
8:19 is the time. AM 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. Mark Meckler is on the phone with me. He is working on a convention of states. Mark, how long have you guys been working on this?
4 years. It was 4 years in August. So the project got started. There were just literally four of us working on this thing. Mark Levin wrote the book Liberty Amendments, which launched at the same time. And today, just this week, we surpassed 3 million supporters nationwide. We're at about 3.1 million, roughly.
When I first heard about this, I thought, well, you're not going to get it done anytime soon. So 4 years really doesn't surprise me. But you got to. I know it's not possible to do this, but I'll tell you anyway. ETA on this? Any?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my best and most honest and optimistic guess. I think that probably we make it to the 34 mark in 2019.
Okay.
And I say that based on the fact that the way the trends are right now. So you have a population that is very frustrated with everything going on in Washington, D.C. We have 32 states where both houses of the legislatures are controlled by Republicans. It's 33 if you include the Nebraska unicam. And I expect we're going to see more states with both houses controlled by Republicans here after this next cycle. So everything's setting up correctly. We have 3 states still pending this year. We have probably 25 states where we'll be pending in the next legislative session. I think it's very reasonable to get it done by 19.
Okay, so now if you have, what did you say, 13 states so far?
12 states.
12 states so far. Is Wyoming one of them?
No, it's not.
I'll see. Now, what do we do?
Well, I think, you guys have a short session coming up in the next year, so it's a budget session. It's unlikely to get anything like this done in that session. The most important thing that we can do, this is true in Wyoming and every state, is that folks who are listening that support this need to be involved, because the way you make these things happen is grassroots activism. Mm-hmm. It's what the founders intended. It's what we need to do. So it means people going to conventionofstates.com, getting signed up, contacting their state legislator, and letting them know that they support this project.
All right. Now, and this is something I've said ad nauseum over my radio career, and there's times people will listen. I'm proud. Here's where I pat myself on the back. There are people who are currently in city council. They are mayors. A few have run and even landed some seats at the state house level in various states, because I kept pushing this message, which is victory goes to those people who show up and keep showing up.
Absolutely.
And we can win anytime we want to win. But, Mark, I've noticed a problem with our side of the argument is not that we don't have the numbers. We definitely do. But conservative thinkers, limited government thinkers, tend to be the leave me alone crowd. So they don't show up to meetings. Therefore, all of this nonsense happens because they're absent.
Yeah, and you are hitting on the most important thing. When the founders put this in the Constitution, what they expected is, if we didn't like what was going on in Washington, D.C., we would do something about it. And by doing something about it, they meant more than just voting. That's kind of the baseline activity. They meant that we would be active, engaged, knowledgeable citizens. So if you're out there and you're frustrated by what you see in Washington, D.C., and you yell at your TV or you complain to your neighbors, that's not enough. You actually have an obligation to your kids and your grandkids, and frankly to the founders going all the way back, to do something about the problems.
Okay, now let's imagine, so this convention of states happens. By the way, I'll be looking for you there.
So I'll be there.
Yeah, okay, so now this happens. Now, I just want you to picture for a moment with how absurd the irrelevant, obsolete news media has become. Can you imagine the coverage they're going to give you guys?
Well, we're already seeing it. I mean, I don't even have to imagine. So I literally, in the last 2 weeks, Hillary Clinton is out attacking us. One of the things she's saying, which is just hilarious, is that it's a bunch of crazy right-wingers who want to do away with the First Amendment. Now, in all of my career in politics, I've never heard anybody on the right talk about limiting the First Amendment, only people on the left.
Right.
And so this is the kind of stuff we're going to say. Here's another thing they're already doing. There's a really well-known show now called Quantico. It's about the FBI. About 5 million people a week watch it. The plot finale last season was about a convention of states and how it's a presidential conspiracy to do away with the Constitution. So I know exactly what the media is going to do. It's going to be ferocious. It's going to be absurd. But I also know that in spite of ferocious, absurd media, Donald Trump got elected president.
Yeah, that's true. Now, that's in part because, and this drives him crazy, which is one of the reasons my theory is the Obama administration was trying to get the FCC illegally, unconstitutionally, to get a hold of the internet and treat it as a utility, is because there are people all over the internet with blogs and podcasts and vlogs and all sorts of other ways of communicating. So here again, we don't need the irrelevant, obsolete news media anymore. They're just not important to us. We can get our news from other sources. So is that pretty much how you're getting the word out on this? I mean, I see your credits here. You're on a lot of the major television networks. But what's the primary way you're getting the word out?
Yeah, I mean, really the primary way is person to person. Of course, we work to be in the media. A couple of weeks ago, I was featured on Fox and Friends talking about this subject, and we'll be doing more of that. And as this project grows and more people get involved, we'll do more and more high-profile stuff, advertising and stuff like that. But really, it's a grassroots effort. It's conventionofstates.com. People get involved. They tell their friends, their family, their neighbors, their coworkers. That's primarily how we've grown to over 3 million supporters.
Okay. So now, what do you need from here out in order to finish the job and cross the goal line?
Well, I think, I sound like a broken record a little bit, but the number one thing is we need people. This is going to take, I estimate we say 3 million. That sounds like a big number. It's really nothing in terms of the nation. We need 20 million active supporters minimum to make something like this happen. It is going to be a grassroots thing because every establishment, entity, and person is going to push back against this.
Right. Yeah.
The unions will, on the right, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will. It's just going to be huge.
And Republicans are not going to be your friends in this.
No, I would say people who are actual Republicans and ascribe to the real Republican platform will be our friends. The Republicans we all see on TV, no, they're not going to be our friends.
Well, now here's another branch of government, because we now have, we used to have one lawmaking body, as you know, and that was Congress. But now Congress writes the law, the courts write the law, the president writes the law, and the most powerful branch of government yet, the bureaucracy, writes the law. You're going to have to go up against the bureaucracy in order to get this done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest enemies of the people in America today. I think it's completely unconstitutional. You're correct. Only Congress is supposed to write the laws, and today most of the laws, the vast majority, are written by regulatory agencies. And that's part of what this is all about, is to gut the regulatory state. Until we specifically admonish Congress through a constitutional amendment, tell them they can no longer delegate their lawmaking authority, they're going to keep doing this. The other thing we can do that I think is really important in a convention is to limit the terms of bureaucrats. Nobody should go to Washington, D.C. and make a 30 or 40 year career working for one of these bureaucracies.
Okay. Now, again, the problem can be is you have this convention, you pass what you want to pass, but as we've also seen in D.C., some things that are passed don't necessarily happen. So how do you enforce this?
Well, so I think there's something that's a little bit of a misimpression. People say, we don't follow the Constitution now. And I always ask this question about that. Which Constitution are you referring to? If you're referring to the pocket Constitution that you and I carry, I've got on my iPhone, I would agree with that.
Right.
But the Constitution we live under now is actually something called the Annotated Constitution. You can buy it from the government printing office. Last printing was 2,738 pages.
Oh,
it contains every court case that's ever interpreted the Constitution. It contains every case, including Obamacare, that you hate so much. They do follow that Constitution mostly, and it allows them to do most everything that they do today.
So, in other words, when I hear a congressman quote something, and I've heard this before, they quote the Constitution, and I'm sitting here scratching my head wondering, where is that? I've never read that. It's in that annotated version I haven't seen yet.
Exactly. And if you get one, I have one that sits on my desk. I meant to buy it to travel with it, but it weighs over 20 pounds, so I really can't carry it around with me in my luggage.
Yeah.
And when you get that thing, what you realize is, well, here's a great example. The Commerce Clause was meant to be this very limited, narrow, enumerated power.
Right.
Supposed to give the federal government the power to regulate the shipment of goods across state lines and nothing else. Today, the Energy Department, Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, the EPA, all of those things operate under Commerce Clause authority. The founders would have thought that that was insane.
Well, it is. Okay. So let's get this together again so people can go find out who you are and what you're doing. Conventionofstates.com is where they need to go online. Any other interweb presence they need to know about?
No, that's really the place, conventionofstates.com. Remember, if you're listening, it's up to you. It's not just up to us. You have to get involved.
Okay. Hey, as you get more updates, as you get closer, you know who I am now, so get a hold of me here, okay?
You bet. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's Mark Mecklenburg, and conventionofstates.com is where you want to go to find out more information about that. 8:35 is the time. 27 degrees, clear skies. It's AM 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. Phone lines open. 632-6500. Outside the area code 888-503-6500. This is Glenn. Who's on the phone?
Glenn, this is Joe in Laramie.
Yes, sir.
I was hoping to talk to that gentleman about the convention. I've got my concerns about it.
Okay.
If everything he's suggesting to get fixed, I have absolutely no problem.
Right.
The Republican Party has been telling us that they're going to get rid of Obamacare, and as soon as we gave it to them, the opportunity found their true colors. So, and they're not the only thieves, sneaks, and SOBs we've got working in the government. So that has me worried. But what really shocked me was one of his final statements about this other constitution.
Yeah. I'd never really heard of that. Yeah.
I've never heard it suggested. I've got friends that can, and I can't, can probably quote any clause. And so, and I've never heard it criticized. I've never heard it defended. I've never heard it used to defend what we would consider unconstitutional because it's the first constitution that it's not following. So my question is then, which constitution are we amending when we go to the Constitutional Convention?
Well, and this is part of what I was asking him. And basically what he's saying is that annotated Constitution gets tossed out. And we go back to the original Constitution, sort of like hitting the reset button. Although this time, remember when Hillary handed the reset button to the Russians and it didn't say reset?
It blew up in her face.
One word, they couldn't get it right. But, okay, apparently these are smart people. No, this is really hitting the reset button. If he does what he's saying he wants to do, we go back to the original Constitution, and that just shuts down the vast majority of the bureaucracy and a lot of what government's doing right now.
Yeah, I don't listen to the news.
Right.
So the only group that I've heard complain about this or worry about is the John Birch's side.
Right.
And I don't think they're particularly Hillary supporters.
Right.
Now, I know a few people that I truly trust and respect their knowledge of the real Constitution, and they seem to be pushing it, but I've never had a chance to really sit down and understand why is it they don't. I fear a rope-a-dope. They're gonna basically we're gonna drag them to the fight, and they're gonna pull out the machine gun, and we're gonna stand there with the boxing glove.
Okay, so I understand the suspicion. I completely get the suspicion because you've been through enough. So then, if not this, what then? Realistically, what then?
I don't know. I guess the biggest problem in with our country right now is we the people is completely misunderstood.
Right.
We the people have simply we vote and we think that's the end of it. Like you say, those victory goes to those who show up.
Yeah.
So many people are so tuned out and have been watching it done wrong for so long they don't realize it's being done wrong.
Right.
When I was the chair of the Tea Party in Laramie, what we tried to do, instead of being so much a pro-candidate, and everybody was willing, able to back whoever they want, was educate. Because, like a juggler, once he stops juggling, the balls don't keep going. They just fall to the ground.
Yeah.
If you get a big rah-rah, vote for Mr. Smith, send him to Washington, and everybody goes back to sleep once he gets there, he's going to be corrupted. And the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. So it was educate. Now, fine. It's a fair enough question, but I don't know if I don't know. This second Constitution thing completely came out of left field.
Okay.
Like I said, in almost 8-9 years I've been involved now, I've never heard it mentioned even once. I understand all these court cases that we would disagree with. But to call that the annotated Constitution and give it a sense of legitimacy.
Well, that's what they're using, though. And while we were talking here, I went ahead and looked it up online. Yeah, you can Google it and read the whole thing. And it mentions, again, all the court cases and all the other things they keep adding to and to make the Constitution bigger and bigger. So it is out there. I'd never heard of it before, but I see it now. So
I'm just absolutely flabbergasted that in all the years it's never even come up in conversation with all the people that I know who can recite the real Constitution, line by line almost. And you mention a law, and it'll tell you how it is supported or not supported by a certain clause or an article. I wish I could do that off the top of my head. I have to do the research each time. But I don't know. There was just something about the way he threw that in at the last minute. Just gave me a real. I mean, are they going to? I mean, you can't. Are they going to be able, through a constitutional convention, throw out all these law cases?
It's going to be interesting to see exactly how they do this. Now, I do think, though, that you should be able to hit a reset button like that, but I don't necessarily know that you throw out all the court cases to do it. I would be really interested to see exactly how this comes together. Whatever it is, it's got to be a simplified version of what we're currently doing.
I hope some of my friends that are far more versed in the letter of the Constitution will call in. I know they listen to the show. They call in. I'd really like to hear their opinion.
I just lost him. All right, wait. He's trying back. Hello, this is Glenn. Who's on the phone with me?
My name's Tim.
Yes, sir. What you got?
Well, I got a question with the Constitutional Convention.
All right.
My biggest concern is that if we were to go to the Constitutional Convention, that they do something like completely gut the Second Amendment.
Right. This is something that I keep asking about to anybody who's trying to put this thing together is let's make sure it doesn't get out of hand because, I mean, God knows if you have a convention like this, where it could go is one primary concern. And the people who are trying to put the convention together are saying, we're only going to be there for 3 reasons, and the gentleman cited the 3 reasons, and we're not going to go beyond that.
Right.
Well, of course, I'm with you. There's a worry. There's always a worry that the thing gets out of control. Always. So
right.
How do you prevent that? I would like to see some stopgap measures in there to prevent that before they start the convention.
Yeah, right now I think it might be a little bit early for that Constitutional Convention, and I think there needs to be a concerted effort to get a lot of the politicians out, rhinos out with primaries.
Sure. Now, this gets back to what you've heard me say if you listen to the show enough. I keep saying over and over again, victory goes to those people who show up and keep showing up. And so rather than waiting for, who's going to run for office to fix this problem, well, you probably saw that guy when you were shaving this morning. I mean, it takes people like us to get out there and run for office and keep running for office and show up to the meetings and continue to show up to the meetings because our side of the argument, we tend to be people who complain a lot but never show up to the meetings to fix it, and that's been our downfall. Right.
Well, how do we do that?
Now there's the hard part. How do you motivate? I've been trying for years. How do you motivate people? I don't know. I'm at a loss there. Get them off their butts somehow and get them in. Because, the left, And these are people, for whatever reason they have, they seem to be motivated to get up and get busy and get organized and fight for what they believe in. But the right seems to have a leave me alone mentality, don't bother me. And how do you motivate that? I don't know.
Well, at least there's some hope in that this last election, it seems like a lot of people showed up that wouldn't normally vote. Yeah.
Well, if we keep pushing on it, maybe we can get more to show up. All right.
Yep.
Thanks for calling. Good. I appreciate it. Phone number to get involved, 632-6500. That's 632-6500. Someone just sent me a note here about the convention. Let's see. Okay, Scott Clem. Oh, yeah, I know Scott. Knows a lot about the Constitutional Convention. In fact, I've had Scott on this program a few times to talk about the Constitutional Convention. I'm sure I'll have him back again. He's one that is pushing to get the state of Wyoming into the convention. We'll see if he's successful at that, because when I asked Mark Meckler about is Wyoming in the convention, he said no. So that would be the next step next state to step up if any state does. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Good morning, Glenn. This is Kurt.
Yes, sir. What you got?
Well, your last caller brought up something that I don't think people realize. He kept mentioning a constitutional convention.
Right.
The Convention of States is not a constitutional convention.
Thanks. I've made that mistake myself a few times. Thanks for saying that. Okay.
You bet.
Okay, I appreciate it. So, in other words, the goal here is not to rewrite the Constitution at all, but is sort of to hit the reset button on our current Constitution. That's what they say their goal is, to hit the reset button on the current Constitution and get us back to where we were supposed to be. Because if you know anything about the Constitution, even a rudimentary understanding, you know that we are way outside of the bounds of what we're supposed to be doing. Oh, another thing on that. If we're going to have some convention of states, we're going to have to make sure that we're using the English language properly. For example, no, health care is not a right. If you think health care is a right, then you don't know what the word right means. You don't have a proper definition of it. Words will have to be properly defined. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
This is Joe. Hey, Glenn, did you make it out to the home show to see Rod?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay, Rod Gow was out there with a lot of information on this. I don't have it with me. I just got off my morning run. I barely caught some of him on the radio. It's a shame he couldn't stay longer to field some questions.
I'll have him back. Don't worry, I'll have him back.
Something this important, but I saw that he had a copy of that annotated, whatever it is, Constitution, and it's like it was two books. They were 16 to 18 inches thick, both of them.
Yeah.
You know, and this is what they use to run over us and everything else, you know, that they do. You know, they don't want to get rid of this because it takes away their power.
Yeah.
If you don't, you know, take time to, you know, find a copy of Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments. Mm-hmm. He does a pretty good job explaining that. Ron gave me a copy. I would loan it to you if you want it.
No, I appreciate that. And also the purpose of the original Constitution, the way the Founding Fathers, the reason why they wrote it the way they did, is because, well, we're supposed to be a very simple form of government. The Constitution was simplified for a reason. You don't want to overcomplicate things like this. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have right now is our government is overcomplicated to the point that nobody understands what's going on anymore. I mean, Obamacare, if you printed it out, would be literally 9 feet tall. Nobody can understand all of this, and I think in part that's by design. And if they're doing that to our Constitution as well, no wonder we're in trouble.
Well, and you got too many people that want so-called free stuff.
Yeah.
When a copy of the Constitution after the Revolutionary War made it back to the British Isles, his name escapes me, a Scottish philosopher read it. He said, this will eventually fail. The people will figure out they can ask, that they can tell their representatives, they'll give them their vote for something, and their representatives will promise them something for their vote. And that's what's going on now.
Right.
And because you've got a bunch of people that don't show up, it's just like what's going on in the school system. We had a guy on the radio 30 years ago here that said The reason they're winning is not because they're louder or there's more of them. They show up on the battlefield.
There you go. Yeah.
And you got to show up for these things. You know, we had a little meeting at the senior center after it was over. You know, and we only had 5 or 6 people show up after Ron stayed for that meeting, and you know, he's an interesting guy. So yeah, you need to get both these guys back on, because if people aren't educated about this, that's why we want a convention of states and not a constitutional convention.
Right.
Because there are checks and balances to keep them from taking over.
Right.
Anyway.
All right. Thanks for.
Hi, this is Julie here.
Yes, ma'am. What you got for me?
Well, I just wanted to comment in response to the gentleman who was concerned about the Second Amendment and the possibilities or the fear of gutting the Constitution. From what I understand, it's only those 3 areas that Mark discussed that would be germane. They call it germane. So if during the convention anybody brings up any possibility of amending anything other than areas in those 3 areas, that would not be germane and it would be out of order. They can't go there.
Okay.
And if anybody is interested, you can go on to the conventionofstates.com, and you can actually see they did a simulation last year in Williamsburg, and representatives from all the states went, and they did a simulation of the Convention of States, and they took it extremely seriously, and there were people that brought things up that were out of order and that got squashed. So that should alleviate some fears that people have.
Yeah, I would hope so. I think part of the reason that people have the fears, and I think you can understand this, they have been so screwed over and lied to over the past few decades. I mean, who believes what anymore? So there's some natural suspicion, and I get that. And even on my end, you know, with what you're saying, as long as there is some circuit breaker in effect to make sure that it doesn't get out of control, and they're there to do just the few things that they said they were going to do. Even now, Mr. Mecklenburg was one of the founders of the big national Tea Party organization. I was in North Carolina at the time. I started a local Tea Party group myself, which I'm proud to say is still functioning right now and still doing pretty good. But we started on 3 basic topics, and it didn't take long before that got so out of control, and people were off into the weeds on so many different issues. And I kept saying to them, no, stick to the 3 basics. It's hard to keep people focused. So give me a circuit breaker, I'll be happy.
Well, and you said the perfect thing. When you said something about what are we going to do? What else? What's the alternative? Well, we've already tried electing good people. We've been electing good people for decades, and never more so than in the last decade or so. With these wave elections, and still D.C. does nothing. So the electing good people thing has been tried ad nauseum, and so what's next? We can't keep going down that road because they just screw us over.
Here's the other big part. You've heard it said several times during this conversation this hour. It's not even just electing good people; it's getting good people to show up.
Also,
that's I think the biggest problem that people like you and I have is, again, we don't show up to the meetings. Therefore, guess who does show up and gets everything done? So
well, and the other part of it is, why are we even bothering with D.C.? We don't even want the power in D.C. Our legislators, we have more chance of electing good people within our state than we do electing good people for Washington.
Right.
And it's closer. If we elect people in the state, we're right here. We can keep our eyes on them. And what you and Mark were also saying is you have to show up.
Right. Well, and then
that's the key.
We also have to, convention would have to make sure, and we would have to make sure as well, that the nonsense and the lies that's going to come from the media, the left, and the establishment. By establishment, I don't just mean the Democrats. I mean the Republicans, the bureaucracy. You know the lies, what they're going to throw at us. We're going to have to learn to ignore that and just stick to what we need to stick to get this done. All right.
Yep.
Thanks for calling. I appreciate it. 8:56 the time, coming up on 8:57.